The old horse's nostrils flared as it picked up the scent, that familiar blend of expensive cologne and teenage angst. Midnight had found him. The boy sat huddled against a tree trunk, miles from the sprawling estate he'd fled just hours ago, tears streaming down his face in the moonlight. He looked up, disbelieving, as the horse gently nudged his shoulder. "Midnight? How did you—" The horse nickered softly, as if to say, "I came for you. It's time to go home and face the truth." The boy didn't know it yet, but his father was already racing down country roads in a desperate search, the words of his terrible lie burning in his throat like acid. Some bonds, it seemed, were stronger than the most carefully constructed deceptions. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Alexander Blackwood stood at the window of his study, a crystal tumbler of scotch in one hand, watching his 17-year-old son Joshua practice riding maneuvers in the private arena behind their sprawling Connecticut estate. The boy had natural talent. That much was undeniable. Even from this distance, Alexander could see the fluid way his son moved with the horse, anticipating the animal's shifts and guiding it with subtle cues rather than forceful commands. It reminded him painfully of Eliza, his late wife, who had ridden with the same intuitive grace. "He's getting good enough to compete nationally," remarked Vincent, Alexander's longtime household manager, who had appeared silently at his employer's side with a stack of mail requiring signatures. Alexander took the envelopes without looking at them. Too good. People are starting to notice. "And that's problematic, sir?" Alexander drained his glass and set it on the mahogany desk with a sharp click. The boy has no idea what attention from the outside world means. The press, the scrutiny, the inevitable digging into family histories. His voice hardened. "It's a Pandora's box I have no intention of opening." Vincent's face remained carefully neutral, though he'd been with the Blackwood family long enough to know what his employer feared. "The regional championship is next month. Joshua has been talking about nothing else for weeks." "I'm aware." Alexander's tone made it clear the conversation was over. The household manager nodded and withdrew, leaving Alexander alone with his thoughts and the distant figure of his son, circling the arena on midnight. The aging black Andalusian that had been Eliza's favorite. The horse was well past his prime at 19 years old, but remained surprisingly vigorous. And the bond between the animal and Joshua had been unbreakable since the boy's earliest riding lessons. Alexander turned from the window and unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk, removing a thick folder labeled simply, "Westbrook Foundation." Inside were documents detailing years of carefully hidden financial indiscretions, any one of which could destroy not only his reputation, but potentially result in criminal charges. The Statute of Can. Limitations had passed on most, but not all, and the scandal would devastate everything he'd built, everything he wanted to pass on to Joshua. But it wasn't just the financial irregularities that worried him. Buried deeper in the folder was the truth about Joshua's cell. Parentage, a truth that, if revealed, would shatter the boy's sense of identity and potentially turn him against his father forever. Alexander had promised Eliza on her deathbed that their son would never know. The approaching sound of fur, hoofbeats, and the crunch of gravel outside pulled him from his dark contemplation. He quickly returned the folder to its hiding place and locked the drawer as Joshua's voice drifted through the open window. "Good session, old friend?" the boy was saying to the horse as he dismounted. "Maybe tomorrow we'll work on those flying changes for the championship." Alexander's jaw tightened. He had to find a way to prevent Joshua from pursuing this path without revealing his true concerns. When direct prohibition had failed, resulting in unprecedented rebellion from his typically obedient son, Alexander had realized he needed a different approach. He needed Joshua to choose to walk away. As he heard the back door open and his son's footsteps in the hallway, an idea began to form, a cruel idea that made his stomach turn, but one that might work. Alexander was a businessman, after all, and sometimes difficult decisions had to be made for the greater good. He would create a barrage situation so uncomfortable, so contrary to Joshua's sense of belonging, that the boy would voluntarily withdraw from the public eye. "Dad?" Joshua appeared in the doorway, still in his riding clothes. his dark hair windswept, his cheeks flushed with exertion and satisfaction. He looked so much like Eliza in that moment that Alexander felt a familiar pang of grief. "Vincent said you wanted to see me?" Alexander hadn't summoned his son, but he recognized the household manager's subtle manipulation, creating an opportunity for father and son to talk. He decided to seize it. "Come in, Joshua. Close the door." The boy complied, suddenly alert to his father's serious tone. "Is everything okay? Sit down." Alexander gestured to the leather chair across from his desk, taking his own seat and steepling his fingers. "We need to discuss this riding competition." Joshua's expression brightened. "Coach Harrington says I have a real shot at placing in the top 3, which would qualify me for nationals. I've been working on. I don't think it's a good idea." The boy's enthusiasm faltered. "But you said after I improved my grades I could. I've been getting this considerable thought, Joshua. The publicity isn't something we need, and frankly, I'm concerned about your focus on academics." "My grades are perfect now," Joshua protested. "I haven't missed a single assignment in months. I've been managing my time exactly like we agreed." Alexander had known this argument was coming and had prepared his response. What he was about to do made him loathe himself, but he believed, or had convinced himself, that it was necessary. "This isn't just about grades." He paused, deliberately drawing out the moment, watching his son's growing confusion. "There are things about your situation that make public attention inadvisable." Joshua frowned. "My situation? What does that mean?" Alexander stood and turned back to the window, unable to look his son in the eye for what came next. "I've never told you this because I wanted to protect you, but the truth is, you're not biologically a Blackwood." The silence that followed was absolute. Alexander could almost hear the gears turning in his son's mind, processing this bombshell. "What?" Joshua finally whispered. "Eliza and I adopted you as an infant. Your birth mother was, well, she was involved in some unsavory activities. She couldn't care for you, and we wanted a child. It was a private arrangement." This was the most vicious lie Alexander had ever told. Joshua was very much his biological son and Eliza's too, but Alexander Barra knew his son well enough to predict how this false revelation would devastate him. Joshua had always taken pride in being a Blackwood, in carrying on the family legacy. "That's not true," Joshua said, his voice shaking. "You're lying." Alexander forced himself to turn and face his son, schooling his features into a mask of regretful sympathy. "I'm sorry, but it is true. Your birth certificate is amended. We've kept this private because, frankly, your biological heritage might be embarrassing to the family if it became public knowledge." "Mom would have told me," Joshua insisted, rising from his chair, his face pale. "She wouldn't have kept something like this from me." "It was her wish to protect you from the truth," Alexander said, the lie burning his throat. "But with your insistence on public competition, I can't in good conscience allow you to proceed without understanding the risks." "Journalists dig into backgrounds, Joshua. If you become noteworthy in the writing world, someone might uncover your origins." Joshua stared at him, eyes swimming with tears. "My whole life has been a lie?" Alexander steeled himself against his son's pain. "Not a lie. We're your parents in every way that matters. We chose you. We raised you. We love you. Then why tell me now? Why not let me keep believing?" Joshua's voice cracked. Unless you don't actually want me competing because you don't want people to know I'm not really yours." Alexander didn't contradict this interpretation, letting it sink in. "I'm simply concerned about protecting our privacy. Your privacy too." Joshua backed toward the door, shaking his head. "No. This is about your reputation. You're ashamed of where I come from." "Joshua, who was she?" "My real mother?" The boy's expression hardened, even as tears spilled down his cheeks. "What unsavory activities was she involved in that make me such an embarrassment to the great Blackwood name?" Alexander hesitated, realizing he hadn't fully thought through the details of his fabrication. "She was young, troubled. She had addiction issues." "And my biological father?" "Unknown." Alexander delivered the cruel falsehood with practiced composure. Your mother wasn't certain. Joshua recoiled as if struck. So I'm not only adopted, I'm the son of a drug addict and, what, some random guy? His voice rose. Is that why you've always been so distant? Why nothing I do is ever good enough? Because secretly you've been disappointed that I'm not your real son? That's not true, Alexander protested, genuinely distressed by this interpretation. You are my son in every way that matters. Except by blood. Except when it might embarrass you publicly. Joshua wiped his eyes roughly with his sleeve. Does Vincent know? Does everyone but me know? Only Vincent and our family lawyer, Alexander admitted, the small truth within his larger deception. We've kept it very private. Joshua's face crumpled. I need to go. Joshua, wait. Alexander started forward, suddenly uncertain. Perhaps he'd gone too far. Don't follow me, the boy snapped, yanking open the study door. I need to think. Alexander stopped, telling himself this was playing out exactly as planned. Joshua would process the shock, withdraw from the competition to avoid scrutiny, and eventually they would repair their relationship on new terms. The family secrets would remain buried. Take all the time you need, he said gently. We can talk more when you're ready. Joshua didn't respond, disappearing down the hallway. Moments later, Alexander heard the back door slam. Through the window, he saw his son running toward the stables, likely seeking comfort from the one constant in his life, midnight. Alexander poured himself another scotch, his hand trembling slightly. He told himself it was for the best. He had no idea how catastrophically his plan was about to backfire. Joshua burst into the stable, his vision blurred by tears, his chest so tight he could barely breathe. The familiar smells of hay, leather, and horses, usually so comforting now, felt like part of an elaborate theatrical set designed to fool him. Nothing was real. Nothing was as it seemed. Midnight nickered softly from his stall, stretching his black muzzle over the door at the sound of Joshua's approach. The boy went to the horse automatically, burying his face in the animal's neck as sobs racked his body. He lied to me my whole life, Joshua whispered against the horse's warm coat. I'm not even a Blackwood. Midnight nudged him gently, dark eyes watching with what seemed like genuine concern. The horse had been his mother's pride and joy, and after her death 4 years ago, Joshua had taken over his care. Only now did it occur to him that perhaps his father had allowed this only because Eliza had insisted before she died, not because Alexander saw Joshua as a worthy heir to the Blackwood riding tradition. I'm nobody, Joshua continued, stroking the horse's sleek neck. Just some charity case they took in. No wonder he never looks at me the way he looks at her photos. For 17 years, Joshua had attributed his father's emotional distance to grief over losing Eliza to cancer. He'd done everything to make Alexander proud, excelled academically, mastered the equestrian skills his mother had valued, conducted himself with the dignity expected of a Blackwood. All for nothing. He wasn't a Blackwood at all. I don't belong here, he said, pulling back to look into Midnight's intelligent eyes. I never did. The horse snorted softly, pushing his nose against Joshua's chest. You were hers, not mine, Joshua continued, the realization like a fresh wound. You probably sense I'm not really family. Animals know these things. He stepped back from the stall, a terrible emptiness spreading through him. The stables, the estate, his entire life, it all felt like a borrowed costume he'd now been asked to return. His mother, no, Eliza, he corrected himself bitterly, had been gone for 4 years. All that time, Alexander had been maintaining this charade, probably counting the days until Joshua was old enough to be told the truth and sent away. The regional championship no longer mattered. How could he represent the Blackwood name when he had no right to it? Every ribbon, every trophy in the case at the main house now seemed like props in an elaborate fiction. Joshua wandered to the tack room, where his mother's old riding gear still hung alongside his own. He ran his fingers over her favorite saddle, preserved in perfect condition. Had this been her way of maintaining a connection to her real family heritage, something Joshua could never truly be part of? A sudden, overwhelming urge to escape consumed him. He couldn't face returning to the house, couldn't bear to see Vincent's knowing expression, the loyal servant who had been in on the secret all along. Joshua needed to get away, to sort through the fragments of his shattered identity somewhere far from the Blackwood estate and its web of deception. With shaking hands, he grabbed his backpack from the hook where he left it during riding sessions. It contained little of value, just some protein bars, a water bottle, his phone, wallet, and a light jacket. It would have to do. He considered taking one of the horses but immediately dismissed the idea. They weren't his to take, and besides, where would he go with a horse? "Goodbye, Midnight," he said, returning to the stall one last time. The horse seemed agitated now, pawing at the ground and tossing his head. "I don't know if I'll be back." Joshua slipped out the rear stable door, avoiding the sightlines from the main house. The Blackwood estate encompassed over 30 acres, bordered on the north by dense woodland that eventually gave way to state forest. Joshua had explored these woods extensively as a child, often on horseback, and knew there was a hiking trail that eventually connected to a road leading into town. From there, he could— What? He had no plan, no destination in mind. His phone buzzed in his pocket likely. His father, perhaps realizing the damage he'd done. Joshua ignored it, plunging deeper into the woods as the afternoon sun filtered through the canopy of leaves above. He would walk until his mind cleared, until he could figure out what to do with the ruins of his identity. Hours passed as Joshua followed the hiking trail, his initial rush of adrenaline giving way to a hollow exhaustion. Twilight descended, the forest growing darker and more forbidding. His phone had buzzed several more times, but he turned it off, not ready to face any communication from the place he'd once called home. Eventually, the trail emerged at a 2-lane country road. Joshua stood at the edge of the asphalt, uncertain which direction to take. The nearest town was Ridgefield, about 5 miles west. He had cash in his wallet and could find a motel. But then what? He was still a minor, technically a runaway. Alexander could report him missing, have the police bring him back. The thought made him start walking east instead, away from town, deeper into the rural countryside where summer homes and horse properties gave way to working farms and wider spaces between dwellings. The physical exertion helped quiet his mind, though the devastating revelations continued to replay on loop. As full darkness fell, Joshua realized he needed to find shelter. The May evening was mild, but he was emotionally exhausted and physically drained. Just ahead, a small public park marked the entrance to another nature preserve. It had basic facilities, picnic tables, a water fountain, and a rustic wooden gazebo that would provide some protection if it rained. He settled beneath the gazebo, using his backpack as a pillow, and stared up at the stars visible between the wooden slats of the roof. How many times had he and his mother Eliza, he corrected himself again, laid on blankets in the south field of the estate, identifying constellations? Had she looked at him during those moments and seen a stranger's child, not her own flesh and blood? The memory of her face, gentle, loving, patient, made fresh tears spring to his eyes. She had never treated him as anything but her beloved son. If Alexander was telling the truth about his origins, then Eliza had chosen to love him unconditionally despite his lack of Blackwood blood. The thought provided a small measure of comfort as exhaustion finally claimed him, pulling him into restless sleep. Back at the Blackwood estate, Alexander paced the length of his study, phone in hand, growing increasingly frantic. When Joshua hadn't returned for dinner, he'd initially assumed the boy was sulking in the stables or riding midnight to clear his head. But a check with the stable manager confirmed that all horses were accounted for, and Joshua was nowhere on the property. "I've searched the entire grounds, sir," Vincent reported, his usual composure slipping. "No sign of him. His backpack is missing from the stable, and according to his location history, his phone was last active near the North Woods before being turned off." Alexander ran a hand through his silver-streaked hair. "He's run away. Because of what I told him." Vincent's silence spoke volumes. "Don't judge me," Alexander snapped. "I did what was necessary." "With respect, sir, was it necessary to tell him he was adopted when he isn't? To invent a fictional birth mother with addiction issues?" Vincent rarely challenged his employer so directly, but his concern for Joshua overrode professional boundaries. "The boy worshipped the ground you walk on." He would have withdrawn from the competition if you'd simply asked him to trust your judgment. Alexander sank into his chair, the magnitude of his miscalculation finally hitting him. I thought he would react differently. I thought he would be upset, but understand the need for discretion. I never imagined he would run away. You told a 17-year-old that his entire identity was a fabrication, sir. But his mother, whom he still grieves, participated in a lifelong deception. Vincent's voice was tight with restrained emotion. What reaction were you expecting? Before Alexander could respond, his phone rang the local police department. His heart lurched as he answered. Mr. Blackwood? This is Officer Ramirez. We received your report about your son. Have you found him? Alexander interrupted. No, sir. I'm calling to gather more information. You mentioned he may have entered the state forest on foot? Alexander confirmed this, providing Joshua's description and what he'd been wearing when last seen. As he ended the call, a strange sound from outside caught his attention, a frantic whinnying and the crash of wood. Vincent was already moving toward the window. It's midnight, sir. He's broken out of his stall. Both men rushed outside in time to see the black Andalusian galloping across the front lawn, heading straight for the property gates. The night security guard was running after the horse, calling for assistance on his radio. But Midnight was moving with surprising speed for an animal his age. How the hell did he get out? Alexander demanded, as they watched the horse clear the decorative fence along the driveway with a powerful leap. His stall was secure. Midnight has always been clever with latches, Vincent replied grimly, and he's bonded with Joshua since Ms. Eliza passed. Animals sensed distress. The security guard jogged up to them, breathing hard. Sorry, sir. He busted through the lower door. Never seen anything like it. Should I call animal control? No, Alexander said, a chill running through him. No, he's heading north, the same direction Joshua went. Sir? Vincent gave him a questioning look. Alexander turned back toward the house. Get the Range Rover. We're going after them. As Vincent rushed to comply, Alexander stood in the driveway, staring in the direction both his son and the horse had disappeared. A terrible feeling of dread settled over him. He had set these events in motion with his calculated lie, and now Joshua was out there alone, believing came. Himself unwanted, while a powerful, determined horse was tracking him through the darkness. What have I done? He whispered to the night air. Midnight moved with purpose through the darkness, his nostrils flaring as he caught the scent he sought. The horse had been agitated since the boy left the stables. Sensing the distress and confusion emanating from the young human he'd come to see as his responsibility after his first rider passed. Animals don't think in human terms of ownership or lineage, but they understand bonds. Midnight had formed a bond first with the woman, then with her offspring who shared her scent and gentle hands. When the boy had pressed his tear-soaked face into Midnight's neck, the horse had understood. Something was deeply wrong. When the boy had walked away, with words of farewell, Midnight had known this was not right. It had taken hours of patient work for the horse to manipulate the new latch on his stall door. The stable manager had installed it specifically because of Midnight's previous escapes, but underestimated the animal's persistence. Once free, Midnight had navigated to the trail where the boy's scent was strongest, following it with the determination of a search hound. The forest trail was familiar, territory Midnight had carried both the woman Dell and the boy along it many times, but traveling it alone in darkness required all his instincts and sensory awareness. He moved steadily, ears pricked forward, following the diminishing trail of the boy's passage. Miles away, Joshua stirred from his uncomfortable sleep beneath the gazebo, his body stiff and chilled despite the mild night. At first, in the disorientation of waking, he thought he was in his own bed at home. Then the events of the previous day crashed back into his consciousness, and he sat up with a groan. Checking his watch in the moonlight, he saw it was just past 2 in the morning. He rubbed his face, grimacing at the stubble and dried tear tracks he felt there. His stomach rumbled. He'd eaten nothing since lunch the previous day, the protein bars in his backpack forgotten in his emotional turmoil. As he rummaged for food, a sound from the darkness beyond the gazebo made him freeze. A soft nickering, The unmistakable sound of a horse, followed by the clip of hooves on pavement. Joshua's heart stuttered. It couldn't be. It. Midnight? He called softly, disbelievingly. A large shadow moved across the entrance to the gazebo. And then the black Andalusian was there, his coat gleaming like liquid night in the moonlight, breath visible in the cool air. The horse nickered again, moving closer to nudge Joshua's shoulder with his muzzle. How did you... Joshua stood, stunned, reaching out to touch the animal to confirm he wasn't hallucinating. Did you break out? Did you follow me? Midnight snorted, tossing his head as if to say, Of course I did. Joshua's throat tightened with emotion. This magnificent creature, his mother's beloved companion, had somehow tracked him miles from home in the dark. Not his mother, he reminded himself, Eliza, the woman who had chosen to raise another woman's child as her own. But as he looked into Midnight's intelligent dark eyes, another possibility struck him. What if his father had lied? What if the story about being adopted was a manipulation, a way to discourage him from competing and potentially drawing attention to the family? It seemed far-fetched, but not impossible. Alexander Blackwood was known for his strategic maneuvering in business. Why not in personal matters as well? You were hers, Joshua whispered to the horse, stroking his velvet nose. You knew her better than anyone. Would she have lied to me my whole life? Midnight pushed his head against Joshua's chest in what felt like reassurance. A wave of homesickness washed over Joshua, followed by anger and confusion. Whether he was adopted or not, he had grown up as a Blackwood. The estate was the only home he'd ever known. Midnight's miraculous appearance seemed like a signboard of what? That he should return? That he belonged somewhere else? I can't go back yet, he told the horse, even as he checked the animal for injuries or signs of distress from the long journey. I need time to figure things out. But you can't stay here either. As if understanding, Midnight stepped back and turned, presenting his bare back to Joshua. The message was clear. I'll take you wherever you want to go. Joshua hesitated only briefly before gathering his backpack and using a nearby picnic table to mount. He'd ridden bareback many times during practice, though never without at least a halter for guidance. Now, with only his legs and voice to direct the horse, he felt both vulnerable and strangely empowered. Okay, boy, he said softly. Not home yet. Just somewhere we can think. He guided Midnight east, continuing away from town, with no clear destination in mind. The horse responded to his subtle cues with the sensitivity of their years together, moving at an easy walk down the empty country road. The rhythm of hoofbeats and the familiar sway of the horse's motion soothed Joshua's ragged emotions, creating space for clearer thought. If Alexander had lied about the adoption, why? What was he so afraid of? Joshua had always known there were aspects of the family business his father kept private, areas of the estate he was discouraged from exploring. As a child, he'd attributed this to adult matters beyond his understanding. As a teenager, he'd noticed how his father sometimes received phone calls that sent him into his study for hours, emerging tense and distracted. Was there something in the Blackwood past that Alexander feared might be exposed if Joshua became too prominent in the competitive writing world? Something that would emerge in the inevitable background pieces sports journalists would write about the wealthy heir with championship potential? Midnight's ears suddenly pricked forward, and he slowed his pace. Joshua tensed, scanning the dark road ahead. In the distance, headlights appeared, moving slowly in their direction. The vehicle was traveling without urgency, but something about it sent a chill through Joshua. This was a remote road at an odd hour. He guided Midnight off the pavement and into the shelter of some trees, watching as the vehicle, a black Range Rover, approached. As it drew nearer, Joshua's breath caught. He recognized the custom license plate, BLKWD1. His father's car. How? He whispered, instinctively pressing closer to Midnight's neck to hide his silhouette. The Range Rover slowed further as it passed their hiding place, its headlights sweeping the roadside. Joshua caught a glimpse of his father's profile behind the wheel, his expression grim and focused. In the passenger seat sat Vincent, scanning the darkness with equal intensity. They were looking for him, or perhaps for Midnight. Either way, Joshua wasn't ready to be found. Not yet. Not until he had sorted through the tangle of truths and lies that had driven him from home. He waited until the vehicle's taillights had disappeared around a bend before guiding Midnight back onto the road, this time heading in the opposite direction. They would need to find somewhere less exposed to rest and plan their next move. "Come on, boy," he murmured. "Let's get off this road. He has to be somewhere nearby," Alexander said, frustration evident in his voice as he drove slowly down the country road. Midnight wouldn't have come this far without finding him. Vincent nodded, his eyes never ceasing their methodical scan of the roadside. "The horse is remarkably intelligent, sir. If he tracked Joshua this far, he might have also found him." "And then what? Led him further away?" Alexander's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "We should have alerted animal control. If that horse causes an accident on these roads, Midnight would never endanger Joshua," Vincent interrupted with unexpected firmness. "Ms. Eliza trained him too well, and the bond they share is extraordinary. If anything, the horse will protect him." Alexander fell silent, recognizing the truth in his household manager's words. Eliza had always insisted there was something special about the Andalusian, an almost supernatural sensitivity to human emotion and intent. He had dismissed her claims as the romantic notions of a horse enthusiast, but now he wasn't so sure. They had been searching for hours, driving the network of rural roads in an expanding grid pattern from where Joshua's phone had last pinged. The local police were also searching but had limited resources to deploy for a teenage runaway who hadn't been missing long enough to be considered endangered. "Should we turn back?" Vincent suggested as they approached a crossroads. "Circle around to the western quadrant again?" Alexander was about to agree when his phone rang through the car's speaker system. The caller ID showed the estate security office. "Yes?" he answered sharply. "Sir, this is Dawson at the gate. I thought you should know I've just reviewed the security footage from the stables last night. It shows Midnight breaking out around 9:03 p.m., but there's something unusual." "What is it?" "Before he escaped, he went to the tack room and—" "Sir, this sounds strange, but he deliberately pulled down one of the saddlebags with his teeth. The one Ms. Eliza used to use. He dropped it by the door on his way out." Alexander frowned. "Why would that matter?" Vincent leaned forward. "Sir, if I may, Ms. Eliza kept personal items in that particular bag. Letters, photographs, her journal. She called it her trail companion for long rides." A cold feeling spread through Alexander's chest. "Are you saying the horse intentionally tried to bring Eliza's private writings to Joshua?" "I'm not suggesting the horse had human reasoning, sir," Vincent replied carefully. "But animals have instincts we don't fully understand." Alexander abruptly pulled the Range Rover onto the shoulder, putting it in park. "What exactly was in that saddlebag, Vincent? What would Joshua find if he read Eliza's journal?" The household manager met his employer's intense gaze steadily. "The truth, sir, about everything. Ms. Eliza documented her concerns about the Foundation's finances years ago. She wrote about her suspicions regarding some of your business associates. And she left letters for Joshua, to be given to him on his 18th birthday if anything happened to her." "You knew about this? All this time?" Alexander's voice was dangerously quiet. "It was my duty to carry out Ms. Eliza's wishes, sir. The letters were to remain sealed until Joshua turned 18, which is less than 3 months away." Vincent's expression remained professionally neutral, but there was steel in his tone. "She wanted to protect both you and Joshua, but she believed in honesty." Alexander closed his eyes briefly, the weight of years of deception and justification suddenly crushing. "The horse didn't get the bag out, though. It's still at the estate." "Yes, sir. But the attempt suggests Midnight understands on some level that Joshua needs the truth." After a long moment, Alexander put the car back in drive. "Call the police. Tell them we're expanding the search to the eastern sector. And Vincent, when we find Joshua, I will tell him everything, the real truth this costs." Time. Dawn was breaking when Joshua spotted the abandoned barn. It sat in an overgrown field about 50 yards from the road, its weathered red paint peeling, doors hanging askew. After hours of riding, both he and Midnight needed rest, and the structure offered shelter from prying eyes. He guided the horse through tall grass toward the barn, alert for signs of recent human presence. Finding none, he dismounted stiffly and led Midnight inside. The interior was dusty but structurally sound, with old hay still scattered in what had once been stalls. Sunlight filtered through gaps in the roof, illuminating dancing dust motes. "This will do for now," Joshua told the horse, removing his backpack and stretching his sore muscles. He'd been riding bareback for hours, and while he was accustomed to long sessions in the saddle, the emotional stress and lack of proper equipment had taken a toll. Midnight seemed barely tired, moving around the barn with curious interest, investigating corners and nudging at abandoned farm implements. Joshua watched him with a mixture of awe and gratitude. The horse had tracked him for miles, found him in the dark, and then carried him through the night without complaint. Such loyalty couldn't be explained by simple animal instinct. "You really were looking for me, weren't you?" Joshua said, approaching to stroke the horse's neck. "You broke out just to find me." Midnight nickered softly, lowering his head to push gently against Joshua's chest. An overwhelming wave of homesickness washed over the boy. Despite his father's devastating revelation or lie, Joshua couldn't deny that the Blackwood estate was the only home he'd ever known. His entire identity was wrapped up in that place, in the heritage he'd always believed was his by birth. If it wasn't, what did that make him? He sat heavily on a wooden crate, suddenly exhausted beyond words. Midnight came to stand beside him, offering silent companionship. Joshua leaned against the horse's warm flank, his mind churning with questions. If he was adopted, why had his father chosen that particular moment to tell him? Was it truly just to discourage him from competing, from drawing potential media attention to the family? It seemed an extreme measure. And if adoption was such a closely guarded secret, why not simply forbid the competition outright? The more Joshua considered it, the more his father's story seemed suspicious. Alexander Blackwood was many things: controlling, demanding, emotionally distant, but he had never been deliberately cruel. To drop such life-altering information so casually, with such apparent disregard for Joshua's feelings, was out of character even for him. What if he lied? Joshua asked Midnight, voicing the thought that had been growing since the horse had found him. What if I'm not adopted at all, and he just said that to keep me from competing? Midnight's ears flickered forward attentively. But why would he go to such extremes? Joshua continued, working through his confusion aloud. What could be so terrible that he'd rather make me believe I'm not his son than risk me becoming publicly known? He thought of his father's study, with its locked drawers and private conversations. The Blackwood fortune had been built on real estate development and investment banking, perfectly respectable industries on the surface. But Joshua had overheard snippets of tense phone calls over the years, seen the occasional visitor who arrived late at night and left before dawn. As a child, he'd thought nothing of it. As he grew older, he'd noticed how some topics were carefully avoided, how certain business associates were never mentioned in public. Is he hiding something illegal? Joshua whispered, the possibility both shocking and strangely clarifying. Something that would come out if there was publicity about the family? Midnight snorted softly, as if in affirmation. Joshua stood and began pacing the dusty barn floor. Mom would have known. If he's involved in something shady, she would have known. He stopped, a new realization dawning. Maybe that's why she spent so much time with me at competitions when I was younger. She was keeping me away from whatever he was doing. The golden light of morning now streamed fully through the barn's broken windows, illuminating years of dust and cobwebs. Joshua's stomach growled insistently, reminding him he'd eaten nothing but a protein bar since yesterday's lunch. He rummaged in his backpack, finding his last remaining snack and a half-empty water bottle. As he ate, another thought struck him. If Dad lied about me being adopted, what else has he lied about? The question opened a vertiginous chasm of uncertainty. How much of his life was built on deception? Joshua pulled out his phone, staring at the dark screen. He turned it off to avoid being tracked, but now he wondered what messages might be waiting. Would his father be frantic with worry, or coldly calculating his next move? Would there be any clue to the truth? Before he could decide whether to power it on, Midnight's head jerked up, ears swiveling toward the barn entrance. The horse's posture stiffened, alerting Joshua to potential danger. Outside, the sound of a vehicle approaching on the gravel road became audible. Joshua moved quickly to the barn door, peering through a crack. A police cruiser was driving slowly past, its occupants scanning the surrounding fields. His heart raced. His father must have reported him missing. He retreated deeper into the barn, pressing against Midnight's side as if the horse could conceal him. "They're looking for us," he whispered. "We need to stay quiet." Midnight remained unnaturally still, seeming to understand the need for stealth. Only when the sound of the cruiser had faded completely did Joshua relax slightly. "We can't stay here," he told the horse. "They'll search all these old buildings eventually." But where could they go? Joshua had no plan, no destination, no allies to turn to. His friends from school wouldn't understand. Most came from similar wealthy backgrounds and would assume he was having some kind of mental break. His riding coach would immediately contact his father. There was no one he could trust, with the devastating possibility that his entire identity was a fabrication or that his father was a criminal. Except perhaps one person. "Ms. Rivera," Joshua murmured, the solution suddenly obvious. His mother's closest friend, Lucia Rivera, had been a constant presence throughout his childhood. After Eliza died, Lucia had remained in touch, though Alexander had gradually restricted her visits to the estate. She lived about 20 miles away, ran a small equestrian therapy program, and had always shown Joshua unconditional warmth. If anyone would tell him the truth about his parentage, about his father's business dealings, about why his mother had kept him so separate from that world, it would be Lucia. With new determination, Joshua checked his phone's map feature without powering it fully on, memorizing the route to Lucia's farm. Then he gathered his meager belongings and turned to Midnight. "One more journey, boy," he said, stroking the horse's muzzle. "I know you're tired, but we need to find some answers." Midnight nickered softly, lowering his body slightly to make it easier for Joshua to mount. The gesture of cooperation brought unexpected tears to the boy's eyes. Whatever the truth of his biological heritage, this connection was real, a link to his mother, to the only childhood he'd known, to a love that transcended bloodlines. Joshua swung onto Midnight's back, settling into the natural seat that years of training had ingrained. "Let's go find Ms. Rivera," he said. "Let's go find the truth." Alexander Blackwood had never felt so helpless. After a night of fruitless searching, he had returned briefly to the estate to coordinate with the police and organize a more systematic approach. The authorities were taking the situation more seriously now, concerned about a minor on horseback traveling rural roads without proper equipment. Search parties had been dispatched to cover areas inaccessible by vehicle. Vincent had remained at the estate to manage communications and direct staff, who had volunteered to join the search. The household manager's quiet efficiency was a stark contrast to Alexander's growing agitation. "I've notified all the local stables and equestrian centers," Vincent reported as Alexander gulped a hasty cup of coffee in the kitchen. "If anyone spots a bareback rider on a black Andalusian, they'll call immediately. I've also alerted Ms. Rivera, as Joshua may seek her out." Alexander froze mid-sip. "Lucia? Why would he go to her?" Vincent's expression remained neutral. "She was Miss Eliza's closest confidant, sir. Joshua has always trusted her, and she lives within a feasible riding distance." Alexander set down his cup with deliberate care. "What exactly does Lucia Rivera know about our family affairs?" "I couldn't say with certainty, sir." Vincent's measured tone suggested he knew more than he was admitting. "But Ms. Eliza valued her friendship greatly." A cold suspicion formed in Alexander's mind. Had Eliza shared her concerns about his business practices with Lucia? Had she left information with her friend? Insurance in case anything happened? The thought was troubling but not implausible. Eliza had been intelligent and observant, and toward the end of her life, increasingly preoccupied with setting things right, as she'd put it. "Call her again," Alexander instructed, already moving toward the door. "Tell her if Joshua arrives, she's to keep him there and notify us immediately. No discussions about family matters. Is that clear?" "Crystal, sir." Vincent's tone was carefully respectful, but something in his eyes suggested disapproval. Alexander chose to ignore it. He couldn't afford distraction now. His son was out there, believing himself unwanted, while the carefully constructed edifice of the Blackwood reputation teetered on the edge of collapse. If Joshua learned the full truth from anyone but him, the consequences would be catastrophic. As he climbed back into the Range Rover, his phone rang. The caller ID showed El Rivera. "Lucia," he answered tersely. "Have you heard from Joshua?" "No, Alexander." Her voice was cool, professional. "But I think you should know something. I just received a call from the police, asking if I'd seen him. They mentioned he's riding midnight bareback, possibly in this area." "That's correct. If you—" "Alexander," she interrupted, something hard entering her tone. Why would Joshua run away on the exact day Eliza's letters were scheduled to be delivered to him? The question hit him like a physical blow. "What are you talking about? What letters?" A pause. Then, "Don't play games. Vincent was supposed to give Joshua the letters Eliza left for his 17th birthday yesterday. Letters explaining everything about the foundation, about her suspicions, about her plans to make things right. She made copies, Alexander. I have one set. The lawyers have another." Alexander's mind raced. Vincent had said nothing about letters meant for Joshua's 17th birthday. He'd mentioned plans for his 18th, but nothing immediate. Had his household manager deliberately withheld this information? And if there were letters, why hadn't Joshua received them? "Joshua didn't get any letters," he said finally. "He ran away because—" He hesitated, shame flooding him. "Because I told him he was adopted, that he wasn't really a Blackwood." The silence on the other end was deafening. "You did what?" Lucia's voice, when it finally came, was barely controlled fury. "You told that boy your son, Eliza's son, that he was adopted, when you know perfectly well he's not?" "I needed to keep him from competing," Alexander said weakly, the justification sounding hollow even to his own ears. "There would have been publicity, background pieces on the family, so you destroyed his sense of identity, his connection to his mother? My God, Alexander, even for you, this is monstrous." He had no defense, no counter to her righteous anger. "I need to find him, Lucia. I need to make this right. If he comes here, I won't send him back to you," she said flatly. "Not until he knows everything. The whole truth, Alexander. About the foundation, about the investigations, about what Eliza was planning before she got sick." A chill ran through him. "What do you know about that?" "Everything." The simple word carried the weight of years of secrets. "Eliza told me everything before she died. She made me promise to watch over Joshua, to make sure he knew the truth when the time was right. I respected her wishes to wait until he was older, but now. Lucia, please." Alexander found himself begging. "Let me tell him. Let me explain it my way." "Your way?" Her bitter laugh held no humor. "Your way is lies and manipulation. You've had 4 years since Eliza died to come clean, to make amends. Instead, you've buried yourself deeper in corruption while using your son as a prop for your respectable facade." The accusation stung with its accuracy. "That's not fair. I love Joshua. Everything I've done has been to protect him, to secure his future. By telling him he's not your son? By making him believe his mother lied to him his entire life?" Lucia's voice cracked with emotion. "You haven't been protecting Joshua. You've been protecting yourself." Alexander had no response. She was right, and they both knew it. "If he comes here," Lucia continued after a moment, her voice steadier, "I will tell him everything. Not to punish you, Alexander, but because he deserves the truth. Eliza wanted him to know. She believed he was strong enough to handle it. And if I find him first? Oh, and if I first? Then I suggest you do what Eliza would have wanted. Tell him the truth, all of it, and accept the consequences." She paused. "He's a remarkable young man, Alexander. Much stronger than you give him credit for. Much more like his mother than you've allowed yourself to see." The call ended, leaving Alexander staring at his phone in stunned silence. After a moment, he started the car and pulled back onto the road, heading in the direction of Lucia's farm. The race to reach Joshua Fursta, controlled a narrative of truth that would inevitably unfold, had just become desperately urgent. Midnight moved steadily across the rolling countryside, his pace confident despite hours of travel. Joshua had avoided main roads, cutting across fields and following forest trails where possible. His years of exploring the area on horseback served him well now, allowing him to navigate toward Lucia Rivera's farm while minimizing the chance of being spotted. The sun was high overhead, beating down with unseasonable heat. Both boy and horse were tired and thirsty. Joshua had finished his water hours ago, and while they'd stopped at a stream for Midnight to drink, the exertion was taking its toll. Joshua's legs ached from maintaining balance bareback, and his stomach cramped with hunger. "Not much further," he assured the horse, patting his neck. "Ms. Rivera will have water and feed for you. Maybe even some lunch for me." Midnight's ears flickered in response, but his steady pace didn't falter. They crested a small hill, and Joshua felt a surge of relief as familiar landmarks came into view. Ahead lay the distinctive red barn and white fencing of Harmony Farm, Lucia Rivera's modest equestrian therapy center. The sight of it triggered a flood of childhood memories: weekend visits with his mother, helping with the therapy sessions, picnic lunches in the apple orchard behind the main house. "We made it, boy," Joshua whispered, leaning forward to hug Midnight's neck. "You're amazing. I don't know how you kept going all this way." As they approached the property, Joshua noticed a small figure in the outdoor arena, leading a pony on a lunge line. Even at a distance, he recognized Lucia's distinctive posture and fluid movements. She had been a professional dressage competitor in her youth, before dedicating herself to therapeutic riding. His mother had often said that Lucia had horse sense and intuitive understanding of equine psychology that made her exceptional with both animals and the children who came for therapy. Joshua guided Midnight toward the arena, suddenly nervous about his reception. He hadn't considered until this moment how his appearance might affect Lucia, disheveled, exhausted, arriving unannounced on a horse with no tack. Would she think he'd lost his mind? Would she immediately call his father? Before he could reconsider, Lucia looked up and saw him. She froze for an instant, then quickly secured the pony to a nearby post and hurried to the fence. "Joshua?" she called, her voice carrying across the distance between them. "Is that Midnight?" He raised a hand in weary greeting, guiding the horse the final distance to the arena fence. Up close, Lucia looked much as he remembered, petite and athletic, her dark hair pulled back in a practical braid, her tanned face lined with the evidence of a life spent outdoors. Only the shock in her deep brown eyes was unfamiliar. "Hi, Ms. Rivera," he said, suddenly feeling very young and foolish. I need to talk to you." "Oh, my boy," she breathed, taking in his exhausted state and the bareback horse. "What's happened? Are you hurt?" "Not physically," he replied, his voice cracking traitorously. "But I found out some things, and I didn't know where else to go." Understanding and compassion filled her expression. "Come inside. Both of you look like you've been through an ordeal." She opened the arena gate, gesturing for him to enter. "Midnight can rest in the guest paddock. There's fresh water and hay, and I've got lunch waiting in the house." Joshua dismounted with difficulty, his legs nearly buckling as they took his weight. Lucia moved quickly to support him, her small frame surprisingly strong. "When did you last eat or drink?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "Yesterday, mostly," he admitted. "We've been traveling all night." "All night? On Midnight? With no tack?" Lucia's expression was incredulous as she helped him lead the horse toward a shady paddock adjacent to the main barn. "What on earth happened, Joshua?" He hesitated, suddenly uncertain how to explain his situation. It sounded absurd even in his own mind, running away because his father had told him he was adopted, being found by a horse who'd broken out of his stall, fleeing through the night to avoid being caught. "Dad told me I'm not really his son," he said finally, the words emerging in a rush. "He said I'm adopted, that my biological mother had addiction issues and didn't know who my father was. He said they've been keeping it secret my whole life." Lucia's face went completely still, a flash of something like fury passing through her eyes before she controlled her expression. "I see. And when did he share this information with you?" "Yesterday afternoon." right after I told him Coach Harrington thinks I have a real shot at placing in the regionals. Joshua's throat tightened. He didn't want me competing. Said it would bring too much attention, might expose my origins and embarrass the family. They had reached the paddock. Lucia opened the gate and helped Joshua remove his backpack from where he'd secured it around his waist. Midnight walked in of his own accord, immediately moving to the water trough. The horse's obvious familiarity with the farm struck Joshua as odd. "Has Midnight been here before?" he asked. Lucia nodded, watching the horse with a pensive expression. "Many times. Your mother brought him often. After she got sick, I offered to keep him here, but—" She trailed off, then seemed to make a decision. "Let's get you inside. You need food and rest before we talk further." "But you'll tell me the truth?" Joshua pressed, suddenly desperate for certainty. "About whether I'm really adopted? About why Dad would lie if I'm not?" Lucia met his gaze directly. "Yes, Joshua. I'll tell you everything. I promised your mother I would when the time came." She placed a gentle hand on his arm. "But first, let's take care of your physical needs. You've been through a lot." The promise of answers, finally, gave Joshua enough reassurance to follow her to the farmhouse without further questions. The cozy kitchen, with its mismatched chairs and well-worn table, smelled of fresh bread and vegetable soup. Lucia moved efficiently around the space, setting out food while Joshua washed his hands and face at the sink. As he ate ravenously, Lucia made a phone call in the adjacent room, her voice too low for him to make out the words. When she returned, her expression was composed but serious. "I've called off the search parties," she told him, taking a seat across from him at the table. "I told them you're safe here and will be in touch with your father soon." Joshua nearly choked on his soup. "You told Dad where I am?" "Not yet," she assured him. "But he does need to know you're safe, Joshua. He's been searching for you all night, along with the police and half the estate staff." A complicated mixture of emotions churned in Joshua's stomach. Part of him was vindictively pleased that his father was worried, while another part felt guilty for causing such disruption. Mostly, though, he felt a desperate need to understand what was happening. "Why would he lie about me being adopted?" he asked, setting down his spoon. "What is he hiding, Ms. Rivera?" Lucia sighed deeply, folding her hands on the tabletop. "It's a long and difficult story, Joshua. One your mother wanted you to know when you were older. She left letters for you, explaining everything. They were supposed to be given to you yesterday, on your 17th birthday. Letters?" Joshua frowned. "I didn't get any letters." "I know. That's part of what concerns me." Lucia's expression grew troubled. "Your father has been selective with the truth for a very long time, about many things, but telling you that you're adopted when you are absolutely, unquestionably, the biological child of both Alexander and Eliza Day Blackwood is beyond despicable." Despite having suspected this, hearing it confirmed sent a wave of relief washing through Joshua. "So I am their son? For real?" "Without a doubt." Lucia smiled gently. "You have your mother's eyes and her way with horses. You have your father's height and his analytical mind. There was never any question of your parentage, Joshua." "Then why would he say that? Just to keep me from competing?" Lucia's smile faded. "That was likely part of it, yes. But the full truth is more complicated. Your father has been involved in questionable business practices for many years. Your mother discovered the extent of it about 5 years ago, shortly before she became ill." Joshua set down his glass of water, his appetite suddenly gone despite having eaten only half his meal. "What kind of questionable practices?" "Financial irregularities with the Westbrook Foundation, tax evasion, possibly money laundering." Lucia spoke carefully, measuring her words. "Your mother was devastated when she uncovered the evidence. She confronted your father, insisted he make things right. He promised he would, but then she got sick, and everything changed." Joshua's mind reeled. The Westbrook Foundation was his father's charitable organization, supposedly dedicated to urban renewal projects. It was a cornerstone of the Blackwood public image philanthropy to balance the cutthroat business reputation. "Is Dad going to go to jail?" he asked, his voice small. That was a real possibility 5 years ago, Lucia acknowledged. Your mother had gathered evidence, was prepared to take it to the authorities if necessary. But she loved your father, wanted to give him the chance to correct his actions voluntarily, and she was concerned about the impact on you, of Ta. Course. She reached across the table to touch Joshua's hand. When the cancer diagnosis came, she had to make difficult choices about where to focus her energy. She chose to spend it with me, Joshua said, memories of those final months suddenly taking on new significance. The writing lessons, the long talks under the stars, the stories about family history, all of it had been Eliza's attempt to give her son as much of herself as possible in the time she had left. Yes, Lucia's eyes glistened with unshed tears. But she also took precautions. She documented everything she discovered. She wrote letters for you, explaining the situation in her own words. She left copies with me and with the family's former lawyer, the one your father dismissed shortly after her death. And these letters were supposed to come to me yesterday? Joshua tried to process this information. My birthday? Lucia nodded. Vincent was instructed to give them to you. The fact that he didn't suggests your father may have intercepted them. She hesitated. Joshua, there's more you should know. The statute of limitations has expired on most of the financial issues, but not all. If the authorities were to receive anonymous evidence now, the implication was clear. His father might still face legal consequences if the full extent of his wrongdoing came to light. And competitive writing would put our family in the public eye, Joshua realized aloud. Journalists would start asking questions, digging into background. Dad's not worried about some fictional adoption story. He's worried about his own crimes being exposed. That would be my assessment, Lucia agreed. Gently. I'm so sorry, Joshua. This is a terrible burden for someone your age to bear. Joshua stared down at his half-eaten lunch, trying to reconcile this new understanding with the father he'd known all his life. Alexander Blackwood had always been stern, demanding, sometimes emotionally distant, but Joshua had never doubted his father loved him, in his own rigid way. How could that same man have lied so cruelly, manipulated him so callously? I have a copy of your mother's letters, Lucia said, breaking the heavy silence. Would you like to read them? Joshua looked up, suddenly desperate to hear his mother's voice, even if only through her written words. Yes, please. Lucia rose and left the room, returning moments later with a sealed envelope. She was very specific about when these should be given to you. She knew you'd be mature enough to handle the truth by now. Joshua took the envelope with trembling hands. His name was written on the front in his mother's elegant script, the sight of it sending a fresh wave of grief through him. It had been 4 years since her death, but in this moment, the loss felt as raw as the day it happened. Would you like privacy? Lucia asked gently. He nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Use my office, she suggested, pointing to a door off the kitchen. Take all the time you need. I'll check on midnight. Joshua carried the envelope as if it were made of fragile glass, retreating to the small, sunlit office. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with texts on equine therapy, psychology, and horse care. A worn leather chair sat behind a simple desk, and he sank into it, staring at his mother's handwriting for several long moments before carefully opening the seal. Inside were several pages of heavy stationery, covered in the familiar flowing script that had once annotated his childhood books and adorned birthday cards. Taking a deep breath, Joshua began to read. Alexander drove toward Lucia Rivera's farm with a sense of impending doom. Vincent had confirmed that Joshua was safe there, but had delivered this information with uncharacteristic coldness. The household manager, usually the soul of discretion, had made his disapproval unmistakable. Ms. Rivera indicated she would be discussing certain matters with Master Joshua, Vincent had said, his formal address of the boy telegraphing his displeasure. She suggested you allow them time to talk before arriving. She has no right to discuss family business with my son, Alexander had replied, already reaching for his car keys. Vincent's response had been quiet but cutting. With respect, sir, Ms. Blackwood left explicit instructions regarding these matters. instructions that were to be followed yesterday. The reference to the mysterious letters left Alexander seething with a mixture of betrayal and apprehension. How much had Eliza documented? How detailed was her understanding of the Foundation's irregularities? And why had Vincent kept these birthday instructions secret until now? As he drove, Alexander tried to formulate a plan. He could deny everything, claim Lucia was exaggerating or misinterpreting innocent business decisions. He could minimize his involvement, suggest he'd been misled by unscrupulous associates. He could appeal to Joshua's loyalty, emphasize the importance of family unity. Even as these strategies formed in his mind, Alexander recognized their fundamental dishonesty. They were the reflexive calculations of a man who had spent decades manipulating the truth to his advantage. The very tactics that had created this disaster in the first place. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to remember Eliza as she'd been in those final weeks, frail but focused, her eyes burning with a fierce determination that had initially puzzled him. He'd attributed it to her desire to spend quality time with Joshua before the end. But now he understood there had been another agenda at work. She had been creating safeguards, ensuring that the truth would eventually come to light. "Even in dying you outmaneuvered me," he murmured to her memory, a reluctant admiration mingling with his dread. The rural roads became increasingly familiar as he approached Harmony Farm. He and Eliza had visited often in the early years of their marriage, before the demands of his expanding business empire had consumed his attention. Back then, Lucia had been Eliza's riding partner and closest confidant. The two women had shared a passion for horses and natural horsemanship that Alexander had never fully understood, but had found charming in his young wife. After Eliza's diagnosis, Lucia had become an even more frequent presence in their lives, offering comfort and practical support that Alexander, paralyzed by the prospect of losing his wife, had been grateful for. Only after Eliza's death had he begun to view Lucia with suspicion, limiting her access to Joshua as he became increasingly paranoid about what she might know. Now, as he pulled into the gravel driveway of the farm, Alexander faced the consequences of years of deception. His son was inside, most likely reading Eliza's account of his father's misdeeds. The carefully constructed narrative of the Blackwood legacy was crumbling, and Alexander had no one to blame but himself. He parked beside Lucia's modest sedan and sat for a moment, gathering his resolve. Through the windshield, he could see the paddock where Midnight was grazing peacefully, apparently unaffected by his night of heroic tracking. The sight of the horse stirred something in Alexander. A memory of Eliza laughing as she rode, her hair streaming behind her, Joshua as a small child clapping with delight from his perch on the fence. When had he lost sight of what truly mattered? When had protection of the Blackwood name become more important than the welfare of his son? With a heavy sigh, Alexander got out of the car and approached the farmhouse door. Before he could knock, it opened to reveal Lucia, her expression carefully neutral. "He's reading her letters," she said without preamble. "I think you should wait until he's finished." Alexander nodded, unexpected humility replacing his earlier defensiveness. "I've made a terrible mistake, Lucia." "Several," she agreed, but some of the hardness left her eyes. But the worst was lying to Joshua about his identity. How could you, Alexander? How could you make him believe, even for a moment, that he wasn't Eliza's son? The question cut to the heart of his shame. "I thought I was protecting him, protecting what Eliza and I built, by destroying his sense of self?" Lucia shook her head in disgust. "You've always been selfish, Alexander, but this was cruel beyond words." "I know." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair, the sleepless night and emotional strain finally catching up with him. How is he taking it? Eliza's letters?" Lucia's expression softened slightly. "He's strong, like his mother. But he's also 17 and has just discovered his father is both a liar and potentially a criminal. How do you think he's taking it?" Before Alexander could respond, the door to what he presumed was Lucia's office opened, and Joshua appeared. The boy looked exhausted, his eyes red-rimmed from crying, but there was also a new steadiness in his gaze. He held a sheaf of papers and one hung Eliza's letters. "Dad," he said, his voice flat and controlled. "Joshua." Alexander took an involuntary step forward, then stopped, uncertain of his welcome. "Are you all right? I'd been so worried." "Have you?" Joshua's tone was skeptical. "Or were you just worried about what I might find out?" Alexander flinched at the accuracy of the accusation. "Both. I was terrified something had happened to you. And yes, I was afraid of what Lucia might tell you. What your mother might have written." Joshua held up the letters. "She wrote everything, Dad. About the foundation. About the missing funds. About how you promised to fix it before she died." His voice broke slightly. "She also wrote about how much she loved us both. How she believed you could still be the man she married." The mention of Eliza's continued faith in him, despite everything, struck Alexander like a physical blow. He had not deserved such grace. "Joshua, he began, then faltered. For once in his life, calculated speech failed him. "I'm sorry. What I told you yesterday was unforgivable. You are my son, my biological son. And Eliza's. There was never any adoption, never any other mother. I invented that cruel fiction to keep you from competing, to prevent the publicity that might lead to questions about the foundation. I figured that out," Joshua said quietly. "What I don't understand is why you would hurt me like that. Did you think about what that would do to me? How it would make me feel about Mom? About my whole life?" Alexander had no adequate answer. "I didn't think," he admitted finally. "I saw a threat to everything I'd built, and I reacted with the tools I've always used. Manipulation and lies. I convinced myself it was to protect you. But the truth is, I was protecting myself." A heavy silence fell between them, the weight of years of deception pressing down. Lucia watched from the doorway, silent but attentive, ready to intervene if needed. "Midnight found me," Joshua said eventually, changing the subject abruptly. "He broke out of his stall and tracked me for miles in the dark. How did he do that?" The non sequitur caught Alexander off guard. "I don't know. Vincent said something about animal instincts we don't understand. That horse has always been unusual. Mom believed he was special," Joshua continued. "She told me once that Midnight could sense what people really needed, not just what they wanted, that he could find his way home from anywhere." He looked up, meeting his father's gaze directly. "I think he was trying to bring me home, not just to the estate, but to the truth, to what Mom wanted for us." Alexander felt a lump form in his throat. It sounded like something Eliza would say, finding meaning and purpose in the seemingly random actions of an animal. She had always been the idealist to his pragmatist, seeing connections where he saw only variables to be managed. "Your mother was the best of us," he said softly. "I've spent 4 years trying to live without her guidance, making choices I thought would secure your future. Instead, I've nearly destroyed it." He gestured to the letters in Joshua's hand. "What else did she write? What did she want me to do?" Joshua glanced down at the pages. "She wanted you to make restitution, to quietly correct the financial irregularities without necessarily exposing yourself to criminal charges. She outlined a plan, something about anonymous donations and restructuring of the foundation's governance." He looked up again. "She also wanted you to tell me the truth, what I was old enough to understand. She believed in honesty, Dad, even when it's difficult." Alexander nodded slowly, recognizing Eliza's practical wisdom in the approach. It was so like her, compassionate yet principled, seeking justice without unnecessary destruction. The path he should have taken 4 years ago. "I'll do it," he said, the decision suddenly crystal clear. "All of it. Whatever she outlined, whatever it takes to make this right. Even if it means some people find out," Joshua pressed. "Even if it affects your reputation? Even if it costs me everything," Alexander said with surprising firmness. "You're what matters, Joshua. You and the legacy your mother wanted to leave you, one of integrity, not wealth built on deception." Joshua studied his father's face, searching for signs of manipulation or calculation. Finding none, he felt a tentative hope stir within him. Not forgiveness, not yet. The wound was too fresh, the betrayal too profound, but perhaps the possibility of a path forward. "I'd like to believe you," he said cautiously. "But you've lied to me about something so fundamental. How can I trust anything you say now? It was a fair question, one Alexander had no easy answer for. You can't. Not immediately, he acknowledged. Trust will have to be rebuilt, action by action. I can only ask that you give me the chance to prove, through consistent honesty and follow-through, that I mean what I say today. Lucia, who had been watching this exchange with careful attention, finally spoke. Eliza anticipated this moment, she said gently. She knew there might come a time when the foundations of trust between you would be shaken. That's why she established safeguards, the copies of her letters with different people, the legal documentation with the former family, attorney. She looked directly at Alexander. She created accountability, not just for your sake, but for Joshua's, so he wouldn't have to take your word alone. Alexander nodded, accepting this reality. She was always wiser than me, more forward-thinking. He turned back to his son. I won't ask you to come home right now, Joshua. I understand if you need time and space, but I do ask that you read all of your mother's letters. Hear everything she wanted you to know. And when you're ready, I'll be waiting to answer any questions, to explain anything that remains unclear. Joshua glanced at Lucia, who gave a small, encouraging nod. I can stay here for a few days? He asked her. Of course, she confirmed. As long as you need. Alexander felt a pang at this arrangement, but recognized it as the best possible outcome under the circumstances. I'll bring whatever you need from home, he offered. Clothes, your schoolwork, anything else? Joshua's expression softened slightly at his father's attempt at practical caregiving. My writing here, he said after a moment. If it's okay for me to use Ms. Rivera's arena to keep practicing. Surprise and hope flickered across Alexander's face. For the regional championship? Maybe, Joshua said, non-committal. I haven't decided yet, but I don't want to lose the progress I've made, either way. It was a small olive branch, not a full reconciliation, but an acknowledgement that Joshua was considering a future that still included the activities they had shared, the skills his parents had helped him develop. Alexander accepted it gratefully. I'll bring everything, he promised. And, Joshua, thank you. For being willing to hear me out. For being stronger than I've been. The boy ducked his head, uncomfortable with the praise but accepting it nonetheless. I'm going to check on Midnight, he said, clearly needing a moment alone to process the intense conversation. As he slipped past them and out the front door, Lucia fixed Alexander with a penetrating gaze. He's giving you more than you deserve, she said quietly. I know. Alexander watched through the window as his son approached the paddock where Midnight grazed. Eliza would be proud of him. She would, Lucia agreed. But she'd be furious with you. Alexander nodded, accepting the harsh truth. What happens now? Will you be part of the verification that I'm following Eliza's plan? If that's what Joshua wants, she replied. My priority is his welfare, Alexander. It always has been, since the day Eliza asked me to be his godmother. Alexander turned to face her, a new realization dawning. That's why Midnight came here. Not just because of your connection to Eliza, but because of your connection to Joshua. The horse brought him to his godmother. A small smile curved Lucia's lips. Eliza always said that horse had an uncanny sense of what needed to happen, almost as if he carried a piece of her spirit. She shrugged, half embarrassed by the fanciful notion. Regardless, he brought Joshua where he needed to be, to discover the truth on his own terms. Outside, they could see Joshua resting his forehead against Midnight's neck, the horse standing perfectly still, offering silent comfort to the boy. The tableau was so reminiscent of Eliza with the same horse that Alexander felt tears spring to his eyes for the first time since his wife's death. I've been a fool, he whispered. So focused on preserving what I thought was important, that I nearly destroyed what actually is. Lucia's expression softened slightly at his genuine remorse. It's not too late to change course, Alexander. That's what Eliza believed, till the very end. That's the faith she had in you, despite everything. Alexander squared his shoulders, determination replacing despair. I won't disappoint her again, or Joshua. It was a promise he intended, finally, to keep. 3 months later, Joshua stood at the entrance to the competition arena, midnight dancing lightly beneath him. The regional championship had drawn a substantial crowd, including scouts from the National Equestrian Team and journalists from specialist publications. Beside him, Coach Harrington made last-minute adjustments to his formal riding attire. "Remember to breathe through the extended trot," the coach advised. Midnight tends to get excited in the larger arena, especially with an audience. Joshua nodded, focusing on maintaining his own calm to help settle the horse. From the corner of his eye, he caught sight of his father in the stands, sitting next to Lucia. Their heads were bent together over what appeared to be a document of some kind, likely another piece of the complex financial restructuring that had occupied much of Alexander's time since the day of revelations. True to his word, Alexander had immediately begun implementing Eliza's plan for restitution. The Westbrook Foundation had undergone a strategic reorganization with a new board of directors and enhanced transparency measures. Substantial anonymous donations had been made to the projects that had previously been shortchanged. A quiet but comprehensive internal audit had identified and corrected years of financial improprieties. Joshua had returned home after a week at Lucia's farm to find his father changed in subtle but significant ways. The expensive scotch had disappeared from the study. The locked drawers stood open. Financial documents were organized in plain sight rather than hidden away. Most notably, Alexander had begun to talk about Eliza, really talk about her, sharing memories and stories that revealed dimensions of their relationship Joshua had never been privy to before. The road to rebuilding trust had not been smooth. There had been difficult conversations, painful revelations, moments when Joshua questioned whether reconciliation was even possible. But there had also been unexpected gifts, like the discovery of his mother's journals, which Alexander had finally allowed him to read, or the day his father had suggested they ride together for the first time since Senska. Joshua was a small child. Competitor 147, Joshua Blackwood on midnight, called the announcer. 5 minutes to entry. Joshua took a deep breath, centering himself as his coach stepped back. This moment represented something he had worked toward for years, but in the past few months, it had taken on new significance. It was no longer about proving his worth as a Blackwood heir or fulfilling his mother's legacy in the equestrian world. It was about honoring the truth of who he was and who he chose to be. In the stands, Alexander watched his son prepare to enter the arena, a complex mixture of emotions washing through him. Pride in Joshua's skill and dedication, regret for the years spent prioritizing the wrong things, and a profound gratitude that he had been given this chance to witness his son's moment of achievement, despite his own grievous mistakes. "He looks exactly like Eliza did at his age," Lucia remarked beside him. "That same quiet focus." Alexander nodded, throat tight with emotion. "She would have loved to see this." "She is seeing it," Lucia said with quiet certainty. "Through him, through you, through that remarkable horse that brought him back to where he belonged." As if hearing their conversation, Midnight turned his head toward the stands, ears pricked forward, gaze seeming to fix directly on them for a brief, uncanny moment before returning his attention to the task at hand. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our next competitor in the Junior Dressage Championship, Joshua Blackwood riding Midnight," announced the loudspeaker. Joshua guided his horse into the arena, the bright sunlight illuminating both rider and mount. As they moved into their opening salute, a sense of rightness settled over him. Whatever came next, victory or defeat in this competition, continued healing or future challenges with his father, new revelations or old wounds, he faced it on solid ground. He knew who he was. Joshua Blackwood, son of Alexander and Eliza, heir to a complex but truthful legacy. As he gave Midnight the subtle cue to begin their program, Joshua felt a familiar presence, not mystical or supernatural, but the living memory of his mother that resided in his own body, in the way he moved with the horse, in the values that guided his choices. She had prepared him for this moment long before she knew he would need such preparation, instilling the resilience and clarity that had carried him through the recent upheaval. In the stands, Alexander leaned forward, his attention wholly focused on his son's performance. The foundation irregularities were being methodically addressed. The threat of exposure had diminished with each corrective action. He had begun the process of redefining the Blackwood legacy as one of accountability and integrity, rather than wealth and influence at any cost. None of it would have happened without that terrible day, when he had told the most damaging lie of his life, and without the extraordinary sequence of events that followed. A desperate boy running away on foot. An old horse breaking free to find him. A journey through darkness that led, ultimately, to light. As Joshua and Midnight executed a perfect flying change, drawing appreciative murmurs from the crowd, Alexander whispered words meant only for himself and the memory of his wife. "You are right, Eliza. The truth may be painful, but it's the only foundation worth building on." On the competition floor, Joshua guided Midnight through the final movements of their program. The connection between boy and horse so seamless, it appeared they shared a single consciousness. As they came to their concluding halt and salute, the audience erupted in applause. Joshua leaned forward to pat Midnight's neck, his heart full. "Thank you," he whispered to the horse, who had, quite literally, brought him home in more ways than one. "Thank you for finding me." Midnight nickered softly in response, ears flicking back to catch the boy's words before swiveling forward again toward the stands where Alexander and Lucia were now standing, applauding with the rest of the crowd. The horse's intelligent eyes seemed to hold a knowing gleam, as if to say, "Some bonds are too sacred to be broken by lies. Some truths too essential to remain hidden. Some journeys must be taken, no matter how difficult, to arrive where you truly belong." Joshua sat tall in the saddle, accepting the moment of recognition, not just for his performance, but for the journey that had brought him here. A journey of loss and discovery, of deception and truth, of running away and being brought back home. His gaze met his father's across the distance, and the smile they shared held the promise of a future built on honesty, however difficult, and love, however imperfect. As he guided Midnight toward the exit, Joshua knew with certainty that the most important competition wasn't the one he'd just completed in the arena. It was the daily choice to face reality with courage, to honor the legacy his mother had left him, and to forge a relationship with his father based on truth rather than convenient fictions. It would not always be easy. The wounds of betrayal would take time to fully heal. Trust, once broken, required patient reconstruction. But as Midnight carried him forward with steady steps, Joshua felt a quiet confidence that they were on the right path. Father and son, bound by blood and choice, moving together toward a future where lies no longer stood between them. And in that knowledge, there was peace.